Calleguas board meeting. Greetings, everyone. And we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance first. Dr. Avila, ready?
Place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sir. Okay, so we're looking for public comments.
Roll call, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, roll.
Director Robert,
Here in person.
Director McMillan is absent. Director Avila,
Here.
Director Waters is absent. Director Quady.
Here, we just have a quorum. Okay, so now we're on to, is there any public?
We do have some public on the line. I don't know that any of them wish to comment, but you certainly can.
That portion of public comments then. This portion of the agenda may be utilized by any member of the public to address the board of directors on any matter within the jurisdiction of the board that does not appear on the agenda. Depending on the subject matter, the board of directors may be unable to respond at this time or until the specific topic is placed on the agenda at a future Calleguas meeting. In accordance with the Ralph M. Brown Act, please limit remarks to 3 minutes. Do you have any hands raised?
I do not see any raised hands online. We do not have any public in the room.
Okay. On to presentation. Okay.
No presentation this evening.
Items to be added to the agenda, government code,
Nothing to be asked.
nothing there. Under the consent calendar, you have the minutes from March 6th, 2024. Discussion, correction,
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes.
second.
Yeah, I'll second.
Motion's been first and seconded, roll call vote.
Director Robert,
Yes.
Director McMillan is absent. Director Avila.
Aye.
Director Waters is absent. Director Quady.
Aye. Motion carries. Minutes are approved. Action items, discussion of a notice to set the date, time, and place of a public hearing to consider amending Calleguas ordinance number 15, setting directors' compensation.
Yes, Assistant Manager of Human Resources and Risk Management, Tricia Ferguson, is going to introduce this item.
Hey, good evening, directors. So today is our annual review of the director's compensation. This is an opportunity for you guys to review if you'd like to set it or make any changes to that compensation. We will need to set a public hearing if you decide to forward with that.
Thank you, Tricia. Any questions, Tricia?
You guys interested in doing a public hearing and increasing the
Vote on that as an action item. Need a motion or discussion? Thank you, Tricia.
Personally, with everything going on with rates, especially down at Met, I don't think it's a good time personally.
My personal comments are that I think that rates should increase gradually over time rather than letting them be stagnant and then a sharp increase. But I would agree that it's probably not a good time to raise board compensation when we also raise rates and have a big rate discussion. That being said, it's not a huge increase and it looks like we're tracking fairly well with the other districts. Do you have any feelings?
Okay. Well, I concur with Director Avila that facing the big obstacle rates, also you've got elections coming up. You can consider how that looks. And I would say not at this time. So all I have. Is there a motion for anything or?
I'll make the motion to not schedule a special meeting for board compensation, public hearing for board compensation.
I'd second that.
Okay, motion's been first and seconded to not hold the hearing. Roll call vote.
Director Robert,
Yes.
Director McMillan is absent, Director Avila.
Aye.
Director Waters is absent, Director Quady.
Aye. And the hearing will not be held. On the reports, you have an update on the Delta Conveyance Project.
Yes, so as the board knows, most of the water Calleguas purchases from Metropolitan is from the State Water Project and originates in the Sacramento San Joaquin Bay Delta. The importance of a reliable state water project for Calleguas, particularly in the face of a changing climate, cannot be overstated. If the Delta Conveyance Project had been in operation during the winter of 21-22, an additional 236,000 acre feet could have been captured, which would have doubled the state water project allocation from 5 to 10%, potentially avoiding the significant water use restrictions Calleguas and other agencies within the state water project dependent area experienced under Metropolitan's emergency water conservation program. The board recognized the DCP's importance by including the following strategic objective in the adopted 2023 strategic plan. Support Delta Conveyance, engage in advocacy and coalition building to champion the importance of Delta Conveyance in ensuring reliable and sustainable operation of the state water project. The DCP has recently achieved several milestones, including certifying the final EIR and submitting a diversion change petition to the State Water Resources Control Board. But numerous challenges do remain to be overcome before the project can become a reality. Tonight, we have Carrie Buckman, who is DWR's Environmental Program Manager for Delta Conveyance, and Graham Bradner, the Executive Director of the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority, to provide us with an update. So turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I think we just need a second to get things queued up here.
So thank you for having us. We really appreciate it. That was a good intro, so I don't think we need to talk more about who we are. But we're going to talk a little bit first about why we're considering this project as DWR, and then move into a little bit about what the project is. And then I'll talk a little bit about sort of operations, outreach, and some odds and ends at the end of the presentation. So first, I think that we usually start a lot of our discussions by talking about the importance of the state water project to the state as a whole. And I think that probably isn't a discussion that needs a lot of emphasis tonight. I think you guys are probably well aware of this. But just to highlight that 3 out of 5 Californians depend on water that flows from the Delta. And I did want to highlight here something that's pretty important. Last year in December, DWR released an economic report on the state water project. And this wasn't a Delta Conveyance deliverable. It really looked at the importance of the state water project overall. And it looked at how the state water project contributes to the economy in California. And one thing, there are a lot of interesting statistics in there if you want to take a look, but one thing I just wanted to highlight, I think we all hear a lot that the state of California, if it was its own nation, would be the 5th largest economy in the world. And if the state water project service area was its own nation, it would be the 8th largest economy in the world. So we really understand the importance of the state water project, not just to water users where it's very clear, but really to the overall economy of the state of California. So that is why we recognize that as sort of responsible water planners, we need to prepare for the conditions that are coming. We've seen in the past few years that we need to plan for and expect what we're calling weather whiplash. So while there's a lot of potential differences in what could happen in the future with climate, there is quite a broad variation between runoff expected. It could decrease 32% up to an increase of 47%. But among all of the different projections, there is some agreement on some trends. And those trends are that we should expect more precipitation as rain instead of snow, more extreme drought and flood cycles, and flashier storms. So pockets of intense precipitation within dry stretches. And we've seen that in the last few years, right? Like in 21-22, it was a critically dry year, but we had this huge storm in October. We set records in Sacramento. I think we had about 5 inches of rain in one day. And then at the end of the year, between Christmas and New Year's, we had another really big storm system. And we need to be able to plan for those kinds of flashy storm events and the whiplash that we saw between critically dry year to last year, which was an incredibly wet year. And so with these changes that we're seeing, more flow coming in the winter, we are going to have more difficulty managing that supply with, or managing that water with the system that we have now because of our need to manage flood protection, flow, fishery, and water quality requirements. Our existing water management system was designed on the patterns that we've seen historically. So the idea that we had snow in the mountains and rain in the valley. During the winter, the rainfall would create runoff and a stable stream flow. And then moving into the spring, the snow melt would continue that stable stream flow into the spring. And we've seen already, and we're expecting to continue that. We can't really expect that strong stream flow in the spring because we are seeing more snow or more rain, less snow, and more winter precipitation as rain. So we know that that's going to limit how the State Water Project operates over time, that our system is going to be less well suited to being able to capture and divert water when it's available, and we need to plan for that change now. So the Delta Conveyance Project would help by capturing and moving water in the winter that would otherwise be unavailable. So by adding two new intakes in the North Delta, we could capture water during these high flow periods at times that we wouldn't be affecting water quality and species. And we would guard against the declining baseline water supplies that we expect as part of the State Water Project. Another really key part of the Delta Conveyance Project is preparing for seismic concerns. We do know that there are risks of seismic events within the Delta. And the Delta has a series of islands that have very challenged levees. And if something during the earthquake happens to a levee, then we know that it will pull in salt water from the bay and potentially take out the opportunity to divert for a lengthy time, even over a year. So having this alternate point of diversion is a really important thing in planning for our seismic future. This shows a little bit about the declining baseline and what that means. So the blue line shows without the Delta Conveyance Project, the State Water Project is going to continue to decline into the future. We will not be able to capture water when it's available, and we'll be facing these hotter, drier conditions that we have to plan for. So the Delta Conveyance Project adds additional capacity to divert, and that would slow that decline of supplies. It would provide about 500,000 acre feet per year, which is about enough for 5.2 million people on average annually. So Christine started talking a little about this, and I just wanted to highlight the missed opportunities that we've had in the past few years. We've been doing calculations for the past few years about what would have happened if Delta Conveyance was in place. In 21-22, critically dry year, we could have diverted during those big events that I discussed earlier, and that would have been about 236,000 acre feet, or roughly a 5% State Water Project allocation, which would have been double what was received in that year, which was a critical year, and those supplies were so incredibly important. Last year in January, we would have been able to divert about 228,000 acre feet. After January, February conditions were fairly dry and we couldn't have diverted. And then after that, as you probably remember, conditions got very, very wet, and we would not have needed the Delta Conveyance Project because we would have been able to divert at the South Delta to meet our needs. This year, however, conditions in the South Delta have been pretty challenged. I think people have probably heard about steelhead issues in the South Delta. There was an LA Times article last week that the presence of steelhead near the South Delta pumps has been limiting to some extent diversions for the past few months, but is right now sharply limiting diversions in the South Delta. And having another point of diversion, an alternate way to get water for the State Water Project, would have been incredibly valuable this year. This number is actually out of date. We prepared the presentation before we got the latest stick that if we had the project in operation through March 14th, we would have captured about 730,000 acre feet of water this year so far. Before January 1, we wouldn't have been able to capture water because of water quality standards in the Delta. So this is from January 1 through March 14th. And given that right now San Luis is about half full, this would have been really important water during a year that we have challenges. And it really highlights to me the importance of being able to have two places to divert water, flexibility in our operations and how we can best use them. So with that, over to Graham to talk about the project.
Great, thank you. So now we'll talk about some of the design aspects of the Bethany Reservoir alignment. This is the project recommended by the Department of Water Resources this past December through completion of the CEQA process. The graphic on the right shows the layout of the project. There would be two intakes in the North Delta along the main stem of the Sacramento River on the east bank of the Sacramento River. A tunnel that would connect those intakes in the north all the way down to the existing State Water Project facilities in the South Delta. Just for reference, Carrie was talking about the existing facilities in the South Delta. That's Clifton Court Forebay down here at the bottom of the graphic, leading to the Banks approach channel and the Banks pumping plant, which then lifts the water up into Bethany Reservoir. So this would be a completely separate and independent operation to capture water through new intakes in the north, convey that water through a 45-mile long tunnel down to a new pumping plant with separate discharge facilities on the rim of Bethany Reservoir. So each intake would be capable of producing up to 3,000 cubic feet per second. It's a single tunnel, just to state that. 36-foot internal diameter, invert depths around 150 feet below existing ground surface. This is a segmental concrete line tunnel constructed with earth pressure balance machine. It's essentially a one-pass construction method where the tunnel excavation is occurring while the tunnel segments are being constructed behind the face of the machine. And those segments form a ring at about 6-foot increments. So it works its way along constructing the tunnel while at the same time performing that excavation. So the Bethany Reservoir alternative, this is the Delta Conveyance Project, has a number of advantages, either compared to other alternatives considered recently or in the past. The project would use what are called cylindrical T-screens. These are state-of-the-art fish screens. They're much more space efficient compared to vertical plate screens. They also have a much more effective screen cleaning technology that makes sure that you get nice uniform flow through the screens. All of this relates directly to the fish issues and ensuring that there's no risk of impingement or entrapment against the screens during diversions. They also result in an overall smaller intake footprint. The on-bank structure itself is about 30% smaller than vertical plate screens. And as a result, that translates to a reduction in size of the entire structure, even behind the levee, which is the embankments that surround the sedimentation basins, the control gates, and everything else before the water drops down into the shaft and tunnel. The entire project or the entire tunnel alignment would be constructed from two locations. We've identified a TBM launch location in the North Delta. This is adjacent to Interstate 5 and an existing north-south railroad line on the other side. These are double launch locations, meaning the tunnel boring machine would launch in one direction, and once the equipment, the trailing gear has cleared the shaft, then the next tunnel boring machine would launch in the opposite direction. And then from that point forward, two separate construction operations could occur at that single location and happen in simultaneously. So the sites are laid out to allow for that. In concentrating these activities to the two launch locations, I mentioned the one in the north, and then also the other location in the south, Roberts Island, right next to the San Joaquin Deepwater Ship Channel, which is the active delivery channel that connected to the Port of Stockton, which is a very large and active existing port. There's also numerous rail lines coming into the port, as well as high capacity roads and highways all merging and connecting around there. So ensuring that these tunnel launch locations are positioned in locations that can handle the extreme construction activities and the construction loads is really fundamental to having a credible project. And these locations are strategically sited to allow for that. Where we have to, we've also identified even exclusive haul roads dedicated for the project. So where the existing road infrastructure is not up to the task, we've included in the project all the necessary access provisions so that we can get to all pieces of the project. The alignment is hugging, especially north of Stockton here, this piece here. The area north of the lower Roberts launch shaft is really hugging the eastern margins of the Delta. There's a number of advantages. We're very close to Interstate 5, so there's good access to each of these maintenance and reception shaft locations. In general, we're on much higher ground there, so that benefits topographically. There's a lot of water and flood issues in the central Delta. The ground conditions overall are better, and that's both at tunneling depth as well as the shallow ground conditions where we need to construct the shaft pads and all the surface infrastructure for the project. All of that benefits by being further to the east and away from those really thick deltaic deposits. Switching gears to power, there is a lot of power required both for operating the tunnel boring machines and then the permanent power associated with the pumping plant down here on the south end of the project. Anywhere that there is new power required and there is not already hanging lines that with towers sufficient to carry the extra capacity, the effort to bury and all of the impacts associated with burying those power lines are included in the project. So that's a big amount of effort and but a very important element of the project to ensure that we're really minimizing impacts on migratory patterns and dealing with what is a very important resource for the Pacific Flyway. In the South Delta, now looking down here at the bottom, we've got the new pumping plant that would be constructed on high ground relative to a lot of the facilities in the Delta. Many of the existing infrastructure and then especially as you move in towards the central Delta are below sea level at this point. But the new pumping plant will be up at around elevation 50, which is quite a bit higher than any projections of future sea level rise and other potential flood impacts that could affect critical infrastructure. This new separate and completely independent connection to Bethany Reservoir would give the state operators ultimate flexibility to deal with some of the issues that Carrie was talking about in terms of how they would control diversions and which locations. And would be a lot simpler through completely independent systems and pumping plants. Other alternatives that we've evaluated did have that same independence, but they merged the flows upstream of Banks Pumping Plant so that existing singular pumping plant would still be needed to do the lift up to Bethany Reservoir. But not the case for this project. Also, for the Bethany Reservoir alignment, there are no new forebays or surface storage facilities included in the project. Other alternatives had for instance, a very large forebay down here adjacent to Clifton Court, referred to as the Southern Forebay. That was necessary for those configurations, not necessary for this alternative. A couple of reasons. By having that pumping plant on ground, we're actually able to excavate the surge basin that we need to manage surge within the system and have that be entirely below ground. So we don't have to deal with surrounding embankments and what would make it a Division of Safety of Dams jurisdictional facility. So it completely avoids that aspect. But additionally, the shallow, broad surface reservoirs have a really large footprint at the surface. They have a lot more impacts at the surface and need to connect to some sort of adjacent waterway for spillway discharges. And so not having those new forebays and surface storage reservoirs avoids several key issues and dramatically reduces the impacts on wetlands and waters by not having to have that spillway construction work that would be a lot of in-water work and a lot of work that would be affecting its natural waterways. So in terms of seismic resiliency, there are a lot of benefits associated with the project. First of all, the seismicity is a constantly evolving science. There have been several seismic events in the Delta recently, which is not necessarily always the case, but it's been kind of an active year up there so far. But all of the design of new projects would be based on the latest understanding of seismicity in the region and would be able to build that in from the ground up. The designs would be for continued operation following what's called a maximum design earthquake. This is defined as an extreme and rare event. For the tunnels and shafts and below ground components, that would be much more difficult to repair and deal with any potential damage. They're designed for just under a 2,500 return period event, 2,500 year return period event. And that is still for continued operation. So that's not butting right up against the factor of safety. That still has operational elements assumed, and it still continues to function even following that type of event. The surface facilities, the intakes, embankments, the aqueducts, bridges, all of those would be designed for just under 1,000-year return period event. But again, assuming continued operation, even following that type of event. The pumping plant has a different set of criteria associated with the building code, but it's also designed for what would be considered a rare and extreme event. A couple other considerations, a lot of the existing concerns within the Delta are associated with shallow soils, unconsolidated soils that are saturated and susceptible to liquefaction. A lot of organic soils that are very, difficult to understand from an engineering perspective and difficult to predict how they'll behave under various loading scenarios. So the tunnel itself would be constructed down in deeper, more consolidated deposits, not be subject to liquefaction concerns at that depth and below those soils that are really the problematic soils for surface facilities. The tunnel itself is intrinsically safer than surface structures that are also subject to amplification when there's a seismic source down at depth and those waves propagate up to the surface. They can create that amplification wave impact, which can really start to create additional problems. The tunnel itself would benefit from the soil confinement around it, in addition to the fact that it's not at the surface on top of those loose unconsolidated deposits. And then lastly, where there may be particular crossings that need to be managed, as is many of the Southern California infrastructure would deal with this. There are various design elements that can be included in it, ranging from just extra reinforcement within the concrete lining, all the way up to flexible portions of the tunnel or reinforced line sections of the tunnel. So there are additional design elements that can be added to the project as well. So we've been doing work now to support DWR's evaluation of alternatives. There is now an alternative selected and recommended by the state. So we are in the process of updating our cost estimate for the program. Our last cost assessment was released in 2020 and it was 15.9 billion. We're currently planning to release an updated estimate in Q2. May to be exact is our timing that we're intending. And this will be an update that will also be used in an updated benefit cost analysis to be issued by the Department of Water Resources. Every bit of this estimate is being fully evaluated and developed in what I would call a bottoms-up approach. So there is no carryover of previous assumptions. Every element of it has been independently evaluated, starting with the updated design and footprint associated with the project recommended by the state. Full evaluation of risks and contingencies necessary to mitigate those risks and deal with anticipated construction elements. We've developed a full master program schedule of the project so that we have a better understanding of the critical path aspects of the project, as well as the total duration of design and construction, which really helps us as we build a full bottoms-up soft cost estimate for all of the management design aspects of the project. We've got the updated property, more sophisticated analysis of right-of-way needs and property needs that goes along with that footprint. And then lastly, environmental mitigation identified by DWR through the environmental review has now been quantified more discreetly and exactly, and where there are elements of mitigation that need to be designed and constructed, we've pulled together those concepts and also allowed for the bottoms-up estimation of those elements of the mitigation. So all of those will feed the updated cost estimate. At the same time, we do believe and know that there are conservatisms built into that concept design. It's the right way to enter the environmental process. There's a lot of assumptions made. There's a lot of information that's not known at the start of that process. So all the while that DWR was performing their impact analyses, we've been collecting subsurface data, historical as well as new data that we've been out drilling and collecting. We know where those conservatisms lie within the designs, and we're going through a process now to evaluate opportunities to improve constructability, revisit some of those key design assumptions, and also leave room for industry innovation, especially in the tunneling industry. It's a constantly evolving industry. Our intention is to disclose, even at this very early stage, a set of what we would call very credible innovations to the project design. This would not be a revision to the project description at this point. That will come later. There's still a lot of design work to do. But nevertheless, we think it's important now to talk about some of these innovations and disclose what we understand and think the impact on costs would be if those types of innovations were incorporated into the design at some point. So those innovations will be captured in a secondary or innovations type estimate and will also be included with all the cost estimating documentation. Lastly, the design development work. We do intend to, once completing the cost estimate that's coming in May of this year, we will be preparing a project engineering report. Right now, all of our design documentation exists in about 3 or 4 different documents. We've got our engineering project reports prepared for the department to support the environmental impact analysis and environmental impact report. But there's various supplements and addenda and different versions and things that have been modified along the way. Plus the documentation includes a number of different alternatives. And so it can be challenging to understand what all of the design requirements and design basis are for a single project. Now that there is a project, we're going to go through and prepare this more cohesive single document that captures all of the design input and design considerations at this point. That will really be our last engineering deliverable that we've identified as part of the planning and permitting scope of work, although there is additional permitting work left to do, and we'll continue to support DWR through that process. We're also starting to turn our attention to the next phase of the design development, which is taking these concepts a little bit deeper into design, closer to what we would want to maybe consider a preliminary design. A big part of that is a lot of additional geotechnical and environmental data to better characterize the subsurface along the Bethany alignment. Also consider additional utility. There's a lot of utilities out there, existing utilities, abandoned old utilities. There's a lot of work to do to really get the concept of the project refined for the site constraints and get it into a position where those designs can be advanced. A lot of survey information would be done in addition to that. Evaluation of the property access and land acquisition requirements. I think we will in this next couple of years consider procurement for the feature design teams. Up until now, all of the engineering work has been done in-house within the DCA engineering team. But there will come a time to start transitioning that work to the feature design teams that'll take those concepts and preliminary designs all the way through final design and then allow for procurement through construction. So that is on our radar, and it's something that we're looking at in the next couple of years. And then lastly, there are some aspects of the environmental mitigation that would trigger through this process as it continues developing. Some of those need to be at least started or even completed by the time construction starts. And so that's something that we also are tracking and have on our radar at this point. So I think with that, I will pass it back to Carrie to finish the discussion.
Thank you. So Graham's talked about the project design, and I wanted to talk a little about how the project would operate. So the idea about the new North Delta intakes is that they would operate together with the South Delta. So we call this dual operations. So we are not looking at replacing the South Delta with the North Delta, but rather having them both operate together. And we would need to meet all regulatory and fishery requirements. So one note, I think we hear a lot of concern that we're sort of abandoning the South Delta, both from a physical and a water quality perspective. Like we wouldn't be diverting water anymore. We wouldn't be concerned about water quality. And I just really want to take a moment to highlight that that's not the case. We would continue to operate in the South Delta. That would actually typically be our first place to operate. And also we still have water quality requirements that we have to meet by law. So we really wouldn't have an opportunity to change that, even if we could, which we can't because we'll be diverting in the South Delta. So in addition, we are creating new operational rules to add fishery protections to the project. So we've got a couple of different criteria that are built into the project. One of them is pulse protection. So when there are fish near the intake facility, we would reduce our diversions. And the other is bypass flow requirements. So the river next to the intakes, when it's really low flow, we wouldn't be able to divert. And as the flows increase, the percent that we could divert increases. So essentially, our diversion is a percent of the bypass flows that would stay in the Sacramento River. One important note is that we are not requesting new water rates or increased water rates for this project, just a change in point of diversion. So the overall amount of water that we would divert would stay within our existing water rate. So just to give a little bit of detail about that, our existing water rate has a maximum cap of 10,300 CFS. Most of the time in the South Delta, the capacity is 6,680 CFS. For a short period during the summer, it's 7,180. And then occasionally during very wet conditions in the winter, it's 10,300 CFS. But we would be limited combined North and South Delta to 10,300 CFS. I think that's an important note because sometimes it's sort of looked at that this would be increasing the amount of water we would be diverting at any one time. And it may divert compared to or increase compared to the baseline, but it's not increasing our overall water right quantity. So the way that we would operate the system in the winter and spring, we would generally continue to operate the South Delta as we are now and use the North Delta to opportunistically capture high flows when they're available. And then during the summer and fall, we would shift from south to north occasionally, not that often, to help manage water quality within the Delta. I wanted to talk a little bit about community engagement. We've been working pretty hard during development of the project to continue to communicate with the communities in the Delta. One of our focus has been on environmental justice and disadvantaged community outreach. So we developed a set of best practices using communicating with statewide EJ experts, and that really focused on raising awareness. So we wanted to try to reach people where they are rather than asking them to come to our meetings. So we went to farmers markets, local festivals. We put flyers and packages at soup kitchens. So we really tried to reach out in different ways than we have historically. We've also had a pretty in-depth tribal consultation process. We sent letters to 121 tribes to identify tribes that wanted to consult. We had 13 tribes that did consult during development of the EIR. We're now shifting to a different phase of tribal engagement where we'll be more working on implementing mitigation measures and working through construction. And so that's going to continue throughout the construction and operation process. We did quite a bit of community engagement during development of the conceptual designs. The DCA led a stakeholder engagement committee with 20 different stakeholders from the Delta who did not support the project, but were willing to come talk about ways that the project could have less of an impact to their community and to the environment. And so we used that insight to help inform the design process. And then we further reduced those effects during the environmental review through mitigation measures. We've also developed a community benefits program that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And we try to have a pretty extensive package of outreach. We understand that people respond to things in different ways. So we want to have some written resources, some video resources, a really broad spectrum of things to try to reach everyone in the way that they prefer. So a little bit about the community benefits program. This is a pretty important part of our project. And really, the idea here is that we are acknowledging that the benefits of this project are to the State Water Project, and those communities are not in the Delta, but the effects of construction would be felt within the Delta. We are working through CEQA to mitigate those effects, and we will have to do mitigation as part of our base implementation. But we recognize that CEQA is pretty prescriptive, and there may be effects that are felt within those communities that aren't fully covered under CEQA. So we wanted to have a program to try to help benefit the communities and make sure these communities can sustain throughout this construction period. So we've been working with the community to develop this program. We think it's pretty important that we don't decide what the communities want, but they help us figure out what's most beneficial. So we're looking at a Delta Community Fund. That would be a grant fund to fund community prioritized projects. And also implementation commitments, which include a variety of things like hiring targets, job training, education, local business use, and potentially things that we call leave behinds. So pieces of the project that we don't need anymore after construction, but might be beneficial to the local communities. An example is a park and ride. Like we're building a park and ride on I-5. If that has the potential to benefit the community, we could leave it in place. If not, we would remove it at the end of construction. A little about CEQA, as Christine mentioned, we just passed a pretty major milestone, which I'm pretty excited about. It was a pretty big effort. So we released our draft environmental impact report in 2022 with the comment period closing at the end of 2022. We had about 730 comment letters, and we subdivided those into individual comments and ended up with about 7,300 individual comments that covered a really broad range of both policy and technical topics. We responded to all of those comments. We had both common responses that reflected recurring themes in the comments and then individual responses to the remaining comments. So we certified our final EIR on December 21st. And I did want to mention that we have received a number of suits against that. That's pretty expected for a project this size and something that we were planning for. So the work through that litigation will be proceeding in parallel with the planning that we're moving forward in the next few years. One thing that we also get asked a lot and was considered in the EIR is, are there alternatives to a tunnel? And we did consider a lot of alternatives that were proposed during scoping, as well as parts of prior studies or other ideas that technical experts had. And we did not end up carrying forward any alternatives to a tunnel in the EIR for a variety of reasons. One of the things that we heard a lot is things like, why do you need a tunnel? Can't you increase conservation and recycling within the State Water Project area? And for DWR, that was not an alternative to the Delta Conveyance Project. We, as a state, absolutely support conservation and recycling. They're part of the water resilience portfolio that Governor Newsom developed, and they're absolutely things that we want to proceed. And we also recognize that the state water contractors are making tremendous strides in implementing them. But we also know, and I mentioned this earlier, the incredible value of the State Water Project to the state as a whole. And as the owner and operator of the State Water Project, our goal was to continue the viability of the State Water Project into the future. So essentially letting the State Water Project continue to degrade and asking the State Water Project contractors to sort of make up the difference with local projects was not meeting our objective for this project. And then another thing that we hear is things like improving existing through Delta conveyance. But through Delta conveyance is the way that we are currently moving water. Couldn't we improve that and not have a tunnel to parallel that path? And we did not carry that forward either because it doesn't address the climate change and sea level rise issues that we talked about earlier in the meeting or the earthquake risk. So we would not be restoring and protecting the reliability of the State Water Project supplies because we need to be able to capture more water when it's available. And without that increased intake capacity, it really doesn't meet that objective. Additionally, the earthquake risk that we discussed is much minimized by having the facility underground. Improving the levees is very hard to maintain in the face of those earthquakes. So a little bit also, I wanted to talk about how the project would be financed. There's been some information in the news that we wanted to talk about a little bit in case people had questions. So there's a lot often about how the project would be financed with concerns that it would be paid for by the general fund or all of California. And so we would fund this project the same way that we fund other state water project improvement projects, which is that the state issues revenue bonds and those bonds are repaid by the State Water Project. So it's a different mechanism than funding sort of other state infrastructure. It's pretty similar to how a mortgage is used to finance the purchase of a house. These are specifically revenue bonds that are the obligation of the State Water Project and not California as a whole. So as part of this, we filed what we call the validation case, which is a pretty interesting piece of legal action. So it's not a typical thing. We actually bring the case ourselves and ask the court to validate that we have the authority to build and finance this project. And the reason is that when we have a bond resolution package, we need to include something there saying that we do have this authority. Typically, the experts are pretty careful about saying that that authority is granted. And so it's the most protective of the investors if we have a legal determination that it's covered. That's most likely to give us the best bond rating, which is most likely to get the best return on the investment for the State Water Project investors. So we started this process in 2020 because we knew it would take a long time. In 2020, we had just started the CEQA process and we didn't have a defined project yet. So when we filed this validation case, we had a pretty broad program definition. We called it a Delta program. It didn't include a lot of details about the project because we didn't have them yet. We were just getting started. And the determination in this case was that the judge said that the project isn't defined well enough for the judge to determine if DWR has the authority. So it isn't that DWR doesn't have the authority to build the project or doesn't have the authority to finance it. It was that the way it was defined in the validation case needed more detail. So DWR has filed an appeal and we're continuing to work on that. And there we see a path for how to move that forward. So I just also wanted to close here by a little bit of what's coming up this year. We have a pretty big year in Delta Conveyance. We've already had a couple of major milestones, one in 2023 with the final EIR and the notice of completion. But also this year in February, we filed a change in point of diversion submittal to the state board. That is starting our process with the state board to add 2 points of diversion to our water rate. So they deemed that application or that petition complete and filed a notice on February 29th. And there's a 60-day review period for people to review and file protests if they have issues or concerns about that petition. So that closes on April 29th. We will then be working to try to resolve those protests, and whatever protests are not resolved will go to hearing later this year. In Q2, again, some pretty major steps in the process. We will be releasing the updated cost estimate and benefit cost analyses that Graham mentioned earlier. And then after that, we will be starting a process to flesh out the community benefits program a little further. We did work before the EIR to develop a framework, but there's a lot still remaining about how that program would work and function. And we need to have a public facing process to work through that with the communities. We are expecting our Endangered Species Act and California Endangered Species Act consultations to be complete in Q3. And also the final environmental impact statement from the Corps of Engineers. They are not a project proponent, but they are a regulator, and as such, they need to complete NEPA on their permit that they will be issuing. After ESA is complete, we will start our water rates hearing with the state board, and we expect that to continue for about a year. The last item on the calendar is the preferred project engineers report that Graham mentioned, and it's going to be a big year. So lots of things coming up. And with that, I think we really, really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all. It's really nice to be here in person and see everybody. So thank you for having us, and we're happy to take questions if there's time.
Thank you very much for coming by and for the update. Do you have questions?
Very good presentation. I really appreciate the detailed information. I love the foresight. I think during our last rain event, one of the most resounding comments was, why aren't we saving all this water? And the answer is because it takes a lot of money, a lot of foresight, and we are working on it. So it's very, very good to see. Thank you.
No questions. Thank you. Great presentation.
Well, I have a question because you're here to update us. So are you going to update me here? I want to test my understanding a bit because my point of view is that we've had the new northern points of diversions from my perspective was also a key to balancing the flows in the delta. Is the flow draw low enough now? Because I've seen Cal Fed at 10,500 CFS and gone down to, the water fix at 9,000, and now we're down to 6,000. But you answered my question about you still have the water right at 10,300. But so I'm just thinking that it's not applicable that how you draw from the northern portion of the delta has much to do with flow balancing. Is that true?
I guess I'm not entirely sure what you're thinking about with flow balancing. Could you elaborate a little?
Well, because, like they complained about the southern flows reversals.
Oh,
And so if you were able to manage from the northern end on how much you draw, that you could actually stop diversions in order to fight that reversal.
so I think a fundamental piece about this project that is perhaps different than the last efforts is that we are trying to keep South Delta operations as they are without the project. And that's for a couple of reasons. One of them is that not all state water contractors are participating. And so it's sort of easier to manage how the water is allocated if the state water project is continuing to function as it is now and Delta Conveyance works sort of on top of that. We can tell where that water is going. And the other piece is it's less expensive to divert from the South Delta, so we would use that first. So to the extent that we are, and the other piece that's really important is that we have started since 2020 having our own incidental take pilot under CSA for operations of the South Delta. So rather than sort of past efforts where it was more federally driven, we now go through a process regularly. We're going through a second effort right now to have an update to that incidental take permit. But we understand that the efforts to protect the species are being taken into account through that effort. So we can, instead of trying to change operations there to sort of be better, those are already being done as part of the baseline. And we're looking at adding an ability to divert in the north. It would primarily be focused during higher flows. So the requirements like for Old and Middle River flow reversals, those are generally to help fish, so they're not pulled to the south in a direction that isn't very useful and they can't figure out how to sort of get the other direction. And during the times that we would be diverting, it's generally the higher flow periods where those aren't issues as much anyway.
So that's the answer to this, is you actually are only addressing higher flows when you divert.
Yeah, actually, as I say that, I'm not sure that's, so let me back up a minute. Oh, Old and Middle River flows are still in effect and still governing at times it would be operating. It is still a higher flow period, but that was an oversimplification. So I guess what I'm really trying to say is we aren't changing the South Delta operations. We aren't using this to try to better operate the whole Delta. We're really trying to focus on just adding the North Delta operations rather than changing both.
And does this affect anything on the component of what the California water fix was? Is that there was a restore? Eco restore?
So California Water Fix, the Bay Delta Conservation Plan was sort of split into two pieces. The Eco Restore piece that was the restoration and the California Water Fix that was the conveyance component. And the Eco Restore continues to move forward. So there are a number of projects there that have been implemented or are in the process of being implemented now. So that's been moving forward concurrently and will continue to be in its own space.
Very good. Okay, that it for your question?
If I could,
Yeah, go ahead.
I would like if Director McMillan doesn't mind to share kind of her perspective on Met's perspective on DCP, because we're not a state water project contractor. We're a member agency of Met, and Met will be making some decisions in the coming year in terms of continued support for planning and engineering on the project. And as our Met board director, I was hoping you could share that perspective a little bit.
Yes, Steve Arcala once told us that, we do have that freshwater pathway, but there really is no alternative to the DCP. We have to have it because it is the only way that we can get those big flushes. There isn't a means by which we could put stones and make a strong pathway, but that would get us where we need to be. So we are very supportive of this. It's not in our CIP programs yet. We've got a lot of big projects to consider, several of which will increase our ability to be able to get Colorado River water, which we can't get now, and to also increase our state water project yields. So no, we were in lockstep with you all the way, and I'm really pleased to see that it's still going forward.
Well, it sounds like there's something very definitive going to end here rather than transform to another.
And the governor wants to see something happen. He wants to see some positive movement in the Delta from the Delta County supervisors, which we will be meeting with on Monday to have those discussions because they want us to join in with them on the bond for levee improvement, about 230 million. And we're going to go, well, kind of what's in it for us? Are you going to step up and join us in support of this project? So we're going to really hold their feet to the fire. I mean, if they want something else from us and our support, it's time that they do the same for us. So we are moving a lot of different angles to keep this project going and also to make us more resilient, more reliable.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, good luck. Best. Might be here going forward.
Thank you.
It's long
Thanks.
overdue.
Carrie and Graham for joining us. I appreciate it. I know you're on a. Not many of our speakers get applause, just so you know. And of course, you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but also perfectly okay if you have other things to move on to. We'll see. Many of us will see you again in the morning at AWA. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Very much.
Okay, we'll move on to the update on proposed metropolitan water rates. Dan Smith.
Well, this is actually going to be a bit of a joint effort here.
Just reading from the.
I understand. I understand.
I'll come stand up here for you though.
Yeah, Dana, the key element of this presentation, but it's going to be a joint effort between me, Dan, Ian, and Henry, so that you don't get bored with any one speaker I'm going to go through the first part pretty quickly because it's a bit of a refresh from what we talked about last meeting. So we've kind of got the similar overview here. The rates you saw previously, the number to focus on here is this 17%, because while you're hearing 13% this year, well, 2025, 8%, 2026, that is an untreated water rate, and we do not have access to untreated water. So with the treated water surcharge, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, we're looking at a 17% increase. That's obviously a bigger number. And what's driving these rate increases? While Met is actively working to contain expenditures, they have, because of lower water sales over the last couple of years, both because it's been wet and people didn't buy water and they didn't have water to sell us, they have eaten into their reserves. And so they're at the point where they need to maintain certain reserve minimums in order to maintain their debt capacity. Those ratios that Dan likes to show you and that need to be kept at a certain level can't be maintained if they don't raise rates. And of course, they're facing many of the same challenges we are, both the low water sales as well as inflation, increased labor costs, and increased costs of financing debt. Additionally, they have a number of pending large capital investments necessary to maintain reliability. You just heard about one of them, the Delta Conveyance Project, but they're also exploring a number of others. And on the whole, the fundamental problem is that the business model, as water sales have declined, it's a business model that's not sustainable. And Met is undertaking an effort to revisit the whole structure of their rates and business model. But this kind of near-term issue is focused on the next 2-year budget. And that's kind of a longer term process. So one of our major concerns is the treatment surcharge, because as I noted, we only have access to treated water. There's 14 other Met member agencies that are in a similar position to us. There's also a number of agencies that have access to both untreated and treated water. And some of those agencies use mostly untreated water because it's cheaper for them to treat it themselves, but they have occasionally large needs for the treated water. So they kind of roll on and off of those facilities. Those facilities have fixed costs to keep that capacity available, but the costs are entirely recovered volumetrically. So those of us who only have access to treated water are paying for those costs to keep those facilities ready and available for agencies who use them intermittently. This is at odds with a metropolitan adopted board resolution in 2017. There was a work group that looked at this issue. And I think the most important part to highlight here is that there was a recognition that maintaining the availability of that capacity offers an operational benefit and that the rates should reflect that value to those agencies. So next, I'm going to hand it over to Dan to talk about some of the alternatives that are under consideration.
All right, so the last time we were talking, they really only had 2 alternatives, which is the proposed budget and alternate 1. After this last meeting on March 12th, they came up with about 5 more ones. The first 3 were actually right before the meeting. We all saw them, and the last 2 were actually given to us at the meeting as it was developed. So you can see this is constantly changing. The bottom 3 are not real viable. I don't think there was much traction for them. Number 4 is to remove some of the conservation costs. Doesn't do much for the rates. Wasn't much appetite for that. And the bottom 2 was to not touch the ad valorem tax. And the problem with those isn't so much the rates this year coming up and the year after. It's the ones after that. They're like 16% increases in 2027 and 28. So those were they were looking at them going, there's no way, we're just kicking this down the road. They didn't really consider them. So we're focusing on those first 4. 3 of them do attack the ad valorem and change it so that will lower some of the rates. You'll also notice that they've started to lower their water sale projections. This is the 2nd year in a row that they're not going to meet the projections. They're looking at a 20% decline from their typical 1.44 million acre feet. So this is the 2nd year they're not going to meet their water sales projections. So again, we said this is the same slide from last time. We can't keep covering the metropolitan water increases It's the largest part of our water rate, and we've been using our reserves because we're running into the same problems that Metropolitan is with the low water sales. We're not at a 20% decline. We're at 8% right now below what we expected the water sales to be. So, and you'll see that in the water use and sales slide. And we just can't continue to absorb these. So this slide that's in this presentation, you can see where all of these alternatives go and kind of where the Calleguas rates end up. So we haven't presented the budget to the board yet or the rates, but we've pretty much finished our budget up. So we're almost to that point where we could present it. And I'm probably going to do some basics when I actually do the rates this time, just to kind of give everybody an overview of what the budget's looking like. We did cut costs as much as possible. You'll see a lot less than consultants that help make up what we could do. We're looking at a 5.5% increase on our rates for our portion of the rates, which then lowers Metropolitan's down from that 17% down to the 13.6. So it definitely does help, but it's still a large increase. Any one of these alternates you're looking at.
Okay. One of the things that we wanted to do is just talk through a little bit about what all this might mean to a typical residential, we focus on residential, a typical residential home in the Calleguas service area. So we're looking at the original proposal that Dan mentioned of a 17% increase to us, which at the high end would be for next year, a 13.6% increase to our purveyors. That would be on a typical, we're assuming that a typical postage stamp quarter acre lot uses 12 units a month. And across our service area, $5 a unit is generally in the middle of the ballpark. It's talking about $100 per year increase if that's on just the water rate. With a 17% increase from Met, that becomes a 13.6% increase from us to our customers, provided they just pass that through. And many of our customers, same as we are, same as Metropolitan, facing increased costs with decreased sales. Some of the purveyors we've talked to have their own rate increases that they're going to have to layer on top of ours, which, as you guys know, that's the issue with the supply chain, is that everyone incurs costs. So this is straight pass through. This is like a minimum on the high end, if that makes sense. So then alternative one, compared to doubling the current property value, property tax, you'll see on the right-hand column, an average residential home value in Ventura County is $800,000. That comes from Metropolitan Water District. So that comes from their assessed valuation that they do across the Met service area by county. You'll remember Metropolitan's votes are based on assessed valuation of service area. So they do this as part of their annual business. So this 800,000 is a Met number. If you take 0.0035%, which is the current property tax, about $28 a year that people are paying. We double that, it goes to $56. So you're paying an additional $28 per year in property tax. But that's not the end of the story, right? It's not like we are still going to have some rate increases. There's still going to be some rate increases from Met, some from us. So there's a $28 per year increase on property tax. Plus, if we assume that some portion is going on the property tax and the increases from Met, our increase to our purveyors, the high end of that is 0.3%. So that $5 per unit goes to $547. If you combine those two, the 28 and the 67, the point of this slide is that whether it's going on ad valorem, going 100% on the rate, it's to the homeowner in our service area and a typical average water user in a home, it's about a wash between the two. So the question then is, what's all the fuss about? What's the advantage of one over the other? And one of the ideas that Dan's already mentioned and that Director McMillan made in her comments at the board, the practical advantage is that we're putting more fixed cost on a fixed rate. So water sales, as we all know, very well. That's why we're in this situation, fluctuate year to year for all different kinds of reasons. The more money that's collected, the more costs that are collected on a property value that's the same every year, that doesn't change. And then there's a number of other reasons, more theoretical than practical. And then Henry may get into some of these towards the end, but high level increases the base of the people that are paying for water. So if it's 100% on volumetric and just the people that are using water pay for it. If you put more on the property tax, everyone who has property that benefits from the availability of water and the capacity to develop that land into something that needs water. The value of that water is adhering directly to the property. And then, there's an argument that property tax isn't sending a price signal, and that somehow moving the cost of water from volumetric to the property tax somehow doesn't reflect the true cost of water. And I think that holds some water, so to speak, that argument, but only kind of in terms of a more traditional 20th century perspective on how we pay for water, right? That given all the forces that we are up against may not be the best way to continue paying for water in the 21st century going forward. So generally, take home again from this slide is that essentially, and again, no one's the typical user, right? Some are going to use less, some are going to use more, everyone's unique. But generally speaking, the alternatives that we are talking about probably being the most likely are more or less going to be a wash at the end of the year on the bank account and wallet for a typical residential user that owns their own home in the district. And then I'll let Dan and Henry fill in the cracks.
You guys want to say anything about that, or should I move on to?
I think you can move on.
Okay, great. Well, we have been actively reaching out to our purveyors and others to talk about these issues so that they're well informed on them. We held a special virtual only purveyor meeting on March 8th that was very well attended. Got a lot of great questions and discussion. One of the requests that came out of that meeting was to basically reconstitute the drought task force and have a meeting with them. We held that meeting this morning. That was also virtual. It was very lightly attended. I don't think we had any elected officials in attendance, although a number were invited. We did have some staff, many of the purveyors who had been at the prior meeting, as well as we did have some city managers and assistant city managers who joined us. Their presentation that they received is pretty similar to the one I'm giving you now. There was a limited amount of discussion. I think we had maybe 2 people speak up and ask questions. And then we are scheduled at our next regular purveyor meeting, which will be here in person next Thursday, to also have further discussion on this topic. There'll be some updates then, because there is, as I'll show you shortly, another Met committee meeting before then that should change some things. We are, of course, engaging informally with our fellow Met member agency managers and Met staff. But I wanted to highlight some of the formal engagement that's transpired. If you haven't already had the opportunity, I recommend checking out Director McMillan's remarks regarding the ad valorem tax at the March 12th Finance and Asset Management Committee meeting. They were also transcribed and put in your board packet if you prefer to read. But I thought she made a very compelling case for why this approach is better for low-income and disadvantaged communities. Then I was the special guest at the member agency manager at the last Met board meeting. They have one member agency manager sit on the dais, and that individual is given a forum of about 5 minutes to speak on whatever topic they choose. I chose to talk about the treatment surcharge. So you can check that out if you'd like. At that same meeting, which was the official public hearing for the rates, President Quady called in and provided public comments regarding the rates, also focused on the treatment surcharge and its lack of alignment with Metropolitan's adopted policy. Those were also transcribed and in the packet. And then I also want to call out Oxnard's Assistant City Manager, Sherry Klima, called in and shared some eloquent comments about the impact of the potential rate increases on Oxnard as a community. And while we don't have a written transcription of that, it's certainly worth checking out the video, which are all recorded and available on Met's website at the link there on the screen. There are some upcoming opportunities for public comment. I think you want to take care of these, Henry?
Yes, thank you, Henry Gromlich, Executive Strategist. So we do have some upcoming opportunities for public comment at the meeting of the task force this morning. We particularly emphasized that coming and speaking to public comments on March 26th and April 8th, when they're having the workshop in the committee, is really when their comments are probably going to have the most leverage. I see Director McMillan nodding. At Metropolitan, a lot of the decisions are made at the committees and in these workshops. And by the time it gets to the board, there's probably limited ability to entertain new alternatives. And so that is what we are recommending. You see also there then how the rest of the actions, the standby charge, and then their August fixing of the ad valorem property tax rolls out. The budget becomes effective at the fiscal year. The rates become effective in the calendar year. Next slide. So in terms of providing key points for public comment, we have focused really just on two parts. And we've focused on trying to shift to a better fixed revenue, to better match the fixed costs, which is the broader rate issue on the underlying untreated, which is also a base component of our treated rate. So resolving that issue helps our customers. And then in particular, we're asking them to make comments on the treatment rate surcharge. It's all the same issue. The issue that Met is facing is really a historic point of inflection in terms of their business model. And what we have today is an imbalance between the fixed costs and the future investment in order to increase reliability and fixed revenues. Met has been at this crossroads before. We go back to the early 20th century, Metropolitan was selling no water and was trying to build a Colorado River aqueduct. At that time, all of the costs were based on property tax because Metropolitan and the region recognized the unique value that having a source of imported water brought to the economic vitality of Southern California. Your property has increased value if it has access to water. We were just talking a little bit about between staff. We have some historic photos of what Thousand Oaks looked like before Calleguas came. Believe me, the property value has increased. Same with Simi Valley. And our experience is no different than all across Southern California. So at the beginning of the last century, Metropolitan faced this. And with the expansion of volumetric sales, they were able to cover more and more costs with volumetric sales. At the beginning of this century, we're facing a similar problem. Lower volumetric sales compared to the costs of moving into a sustainable future. So we believe that finding a stable source of fixed revenue for Metropolitan is critical for its future sustainability. The treatment charge with 85% fixed costs and 100% volumetric recovery is simply a distortion, a kind of a extreme example of what happens if you don't address this. In 2017, there was a multi-member agency task force that took this on, and there was the Metropolitan staff recommendation that it ought to be readjusted the structure of the treatment surcharge in order to really correctly allocate some of the costs that are necessary for standby treatment charge, treatment capacity for those member agencies that occasionally use that. At the time, it was believed that increased water sales would eventually bring those together. Those diverging costs between the treatment surcharge and the untreated water. Well, what we've seen is that that didn't happen. The Met Board had the foresight to adopt a policy that recognized that that treatment capacity should be part of the treatment surcharge. And so our ask for the Met Board is simply to implement that policy in regards to the treatment surcharge. Whether there'll be time by April remains to be seen. But overall, having this opportunity to present the facts to the Met Board, have them wrestle with this, is really going to be a test to see whether they can align the three major axes of equity in water rates. And those are who benefits, who pays, and who decides. When those are in alignment, it's a beautiful world. When those get distorted, you create instability and unsustainability. And so we'll be watching these deliberations closely. And your board has been blessed with a finance manager that has correctly adjusted volumetric sales to reality. So Calleguas is relatively in a better place. And you have a staff that is developing water supply alternatives to actively develop an alternative to the rising costs of metropolitan water should they get out of that alignment between who benefits, who pays, and who decides. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, questions?
I agree with everything that's been said. We have to be mindful of our communities and keeping water affordable, so. Got to get ahead of this and make sure it's known that it's Metropolitan that's causing this. And hopefully get some backing to help us with this.
Anybody else? I had a question. One is so the treatment capacity charge thing is not going to reappear. That's dead from before.
The way Metropolitan's cost of service analysis is done is they take each cost area and they functionalize it so that you have different functions of the Met service. And then within those functions, they assign the costs to different areas. So within that analysis, there is already an analysis that has the fixed costs that are necessary to maintain the current treatment capacity. The only difference is rather than apply those to a fixed capacity charge, they simply roll those into the volumetric rate. But they've done the analysis to pull out that point, but it isn't reflected in the treatment surcharge. A new treatment surcharge based on the proposal from 2017 would have essentially a capacity charge similar to the capacity charge that Metropolitan has for your use of the distribution system for Metropolitan. Does that address your question?
I might be a little confused because it sounds like the application of the capacity charge is in a fixed component. And that's a piece that is really absorbed by most of the people that are on treated water expense, but the people that are using it for peak flows They don't pay that?
They only pay it when they take the volumetric. But the capacity that allows for a peak flow or to, say, shut down a treatment plant to do some work on it, that isn't paid for on a annual basis. The proposal in the 2017, I believe, uses a 3-year rolling average of the use of that treatment capacity. So if eventually you did not need that treatment capacity at all, you would not be paying for it.
But so why was the earlier version of the treatment capacity charge rejected?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. Essentially, if your agency has both treated and untreated water supplies from Metropolitan, most large agencies have found that it's cost effective to treat the raw water for Met and get a cost savings. So this proposal would have reflected a slight increase in the cost of water in order to pay for that treatment capacity, and on the basis of economic self-interest, not on the basis of any sort of rational cost of service argument. It was rejected, and those votes carried the majority of the Met board.
Because those agencies either they can live on untreated water or they can walk away from it when they want.
Or they've also made substantial investments in developing their own sources of water to supplement Metropolitan, and that's a benefit overall to the metropolitan service area. And it's also something that your board has looked at in its new model of resilience, that if we emulate the resource mix of ODOC and Los Angeles and San Diego County Water Authority, we're probably going to have better policy alignment. But as it stands, we have a single point of connection with only treated water. And hence our policies don't align, our policy interests. And we also have a form of governance that dates back to that early 20th century. President Hoover, I believe, was in power. And that governance continues to provide the basis for the weighted vote at Metropolitan. So as I said earlier, this will be an interesting litmus test because you have a question of whether you should try to recover fixed costs on an ad valorem basis, on a property tax basis. People that are participating in that decision are voting on the weighted basis of ad valorem, but they may reject putting the costs on the ad valorem. So it creates a tension if you're deciding on the basis of your assessed valuation, but you aren't paying on the basis of your assessed valuation.
I think I want one more question. The ad valorem. I heard something in the meeting that piqued my interest, and that was the fact that there are some entities, some places where when you do an ad valorem tax, some people are not taking the metropolitan water. And so how are they treated in terms of property tax changes?
They are treated in the same way in which they're treated right now. So there are areas in the metropolitan service area that currently do not receive metropolitan water, but they are annexed and have the ability to access that water. And that ability to access that water is reflected in their property valuation. And so they would be subject to this incremental increase.
So like for us in Ventura County, knowing that like Rio Manor is just all groundwater wells. They've seen if we escalate on an ad valorem tax, they end up being charged as well.
Yes.
I mean, if they're within the Calleguas service area.
Well, kind of, yeah, I don't know that, I guess.
No, so like an interesting example of how this works is the city of Santa Monica, which took almost no metropolitan water, was reliant upon groundwater until they had a groundwater contamination problem. And they were able to shift over to metropolitan to provide potable water for their entire city. Having that kind of ability, that kind of flexibility, what kind of price would you pay on that?
I have a piece of property, I pay property tax on to Calleguas, and have no ability to get Calleguas water.
Interesting. So, I guess my impression at this point is that, because the deficit is so large to advocate for some of these large increases, I just see a diversified portfolio of charges. In other words, the more places you can pick from the buckets, I guess it's the least amount of pain. So that's just my question. Thank you.
And we have hope and belief that the Metropolitan Board is going to rise to this occasion and make a decision that really benefits the whole of Metropolitan and looks beyond just narrow economic self-interest. So that's our expectation and our hope. And we will see how it all plays out.
So it's good.
More reasons to speed up on diversification of supply.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you, everybody. Okay, we'll go on to the general manager's report.
Sure, just a couple of kind of interesting meetings that I've participated in over the last month. As I mentioned, I was the Met member agency general manager guest at the March 12th Met board meeting where I made remarks about the treated water surcharge. Also am a participant in the climate adaptation master plan for water task force at Metropolitan, as is Director McMillan. So we participated in an all-day meeting on Monday for that. That included some simulations and games to try to illustrate the concepts of uncertainty, and that were pretty interesting. A couple of weeks ago, gave a presentation to the Oxnard City Council, providing a bit of an overview. Director McMillan was also present for that. And so I gave an overview kind of who Calleguas is, a little information on conservation funding that has gone to City of Oxnard and its residents, as well as information on our RIST effort. That was at the request of their assistant city manager. I had an interesting meeting with Camarosa about potential collaboration opportunities, and we've also had 3 additional engagement meetings on RIST with Oxnard United and Ventura that have been really interesting and productive, and I'm looking forward to sharing more with the board on that in the coming months. Also do want to mention I am on vacation starting Friday and through all next week. So while I am out, I'll send the board an email tomorrow, but Ian will be acting general manager in my absence. I have to report.
Okay, on to the water use and sales. Power generation. Is that right?
Good evening, directors. Tonight we have the water use and sales for February. In the month of February, we had a very wet February, so we didn't get much water sold. We sold 2,862 acre feet out of our budget of 4,290. So overall for the fiscal year, we are close to 4,000 acre feet under what we would have expected at this point, which puts us at that 8% under our budgeted amount, like I was saying a little bit earlier. Better than what Metropolitan's reporting, and we don't get a lot of rain, which we haven't in March, we should be starting to get back to normal numbers, I believe. Been a little bit warmer in March. You can see by the graphs how much we've missed the mark in the last 2 months. It's really been affected because we've had another rather wet winter in January and February, which definitely affected the water sales. Looking at the Met bill, kind of as I suspect, it's kind of a smaller Met bill for a change. But we had total water sales of the $3.59 million. We did put a little bit of water into Lake Bard to top it off during this month. We have a little reconciliation to get to the $3.8 million purchased. We had in the CRC, the RTS, and then we did get some LRP money back for Camarillo and Camarosa of $124,000, and we had only $7,300 going toward the turf replacement for the month of February, getting us to the $4.6 million Met bill. Looking at the SMP, it continues to be underperforming. Camarillo and Camarosa both were a little bit less than what we'd expected, so we're at 56 acre feet out of a budget of 115, putting us a total of 494 acre feet of discharge for the fiscal year to date, when we should be closer to the 859. Because of the wet January, we also didn't generate a lot of electricity. It's not expected a lot in the month of January, so the budget was only 9,500, but we only brought in about $5,600 worth of revenue. So as expected, but for the year, you can see we are well above where we thought we'd be with the $414,000. We're expected to probably be about 625 if we continue at this pace.
Better than last year, January.
Very much better than last year. So I'm very happy with that. I'm looking at the overall revenues. You can see that we had $4.9 million in revenues for the water sales, bringing our year to date to $74 million out of a $122 million budget. Recycled water, very little water was sold in the month of February because of the rain. Same kind of deal with that. Total year to date, 59,000. So typical budget was 107. So we're a little bit behind at this point. SMP's behind because they're not discharging, and power generation is way above. So making up for the other two that are behind. Looking at our cash and investments, you can see that we actually went through some cash in the month of February. That is typical for this time of year, as we paid the Met bill from December, which was much higher water sales than we had in January. So that cash flow is not coming in at this time. Plus, we still have the Las Virgenes paying. We're paying a lot of money out trying to get that project finished up. So that resulted in about $2 million of our cash going out. Probably starting in March, we're starting to start seeing it go the other way. We should start getting more cash in than we're sending in. I'm hoping. Starts that way. And that's all I have for the water use and sales for the month of February. Are there any questions?
Mr. Dan. I'm good, I guess.
Thank you.
Okay, general counsel report.
Just a few brief items. You all noted that a quarterly legal summary had been distributed. So if there's any questions about that, please feel free to reach out. On the drive over, or just prior to my drive over tonight, you recall with the PFAS opt-outs, we had heard about DuPont and we're waiting about 3M. They finally issued an order about 3M, about the entities who are non-compliant. Calleguas was not on that list. There were about 7 or 8 California entities that were dinged, saying that their opt-outs were insufficient. But again, Calleguas was not, and we're okay. I have a handout for you at the close of the meeting on AB 2449, the Brown Act teleconferencing requirements. I came across a handout, kind of modified it a little bit. Very clear. I think it might be helpful to the board in terms of being able to use just cause in emergency circumstances and normal teleconferencing rules. And then we also have a closed session on for tonight.
Okay, thank you for the update. Board of Directors reports, ancillary duties. Aqua Region 8, no report. Aqua Joint Powers Insurance Authority rep, no report. Association of Water Agencies, Ventura County rep.
Yeah, on the yesterday, I attended the Water Issues Committee over Zoom. Today's my last day as president of AWH. Tomorrow, Andy Martini will be taking over. Still been dealing with some issues there on transparency, really, mostly. So that's about it.
Fox Canyon.
No meeting since the last board meeting, but they have one coming up on the 27th.
Okay, Metropolitan Water District Director.
Yes, on March 7th, I attended the Northern Caucus. On March 8th, I chaired the Bay Delta Ad Hoc Committee. And staff provide this with an update on Bay Delta levee maintenance subventions, Delta Stewardship Council activities, the upcoming Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority meeting, and the Association of California Water Agencies Climate Bond Letter to the California Legislature. And on March 11th and 12th, I attended Metropolitan's committee and board meetings. A summary is provided to you, but the one thing that was the most important to us is on they amended the 10-year CIP for fiscal year 22-23 and 23-24 to include the Sepulveda feeder pump station stage 2. And what I've laid out to you, the summary in the provided was just that, but I wanted to actually break the numbers down to you to show stages and steps we have to go through in order to get there. And as a total, all these projects will cost $410 million. So it's a big chunk of change, but it's absolutely needed for us to get our resilience and reliability boosted up. And then on March 15th, I participated in this webinar on safe drinking water for disadvantaged communities. It was very good. I hope to see it posted soon. And I attended MWD's board training workshop on March 18th on climate adaptation and scenario planning. Thank you.
Thank you. LAFCO Commissioner?
Yeah, this morning, I attended the LAFCO meeting. It was my first meeting as vice chair. I was elected vice chair at the last meeting. And we went over the MSR for Ojai Basin Groundwater Management Agency, Ojai Water Conservation District, and Pleasant Valley County Water District. Jared Bouchard was there and answered some questions. Everything's good with Pleasant Valley, Ojai Basin Groundwater Management Agency, and Ojai Water Conservation District. Have some issues with their MSR and really going back to their 2003 MSR. We're really, it's two agencies that are doing the same thing, and also no records really. So when they went back to do the MSR, there wasn't really any records for them to do anything. So LAFCO is now considering to begin proceedings of dissolution of one of the districts in probably within the following year. Then we moved on and approved the Ojai Basin Groundwater Management Agency sphere of influence. We put off approving, we continued the sphere of influence for Ojai Water Conservation District. And we approved Pleasant Valley County Water District's sphere of influence. That's it.
Thank you. Ventura County Regional Energy Alliance, nothing new there. Report. Ventura County Special District Association.
No meetings since last board meeting.
We'll go on to the admin code reimbursable meetings. Director Robert.
Since last board meeting, the AWA board meeting on the 7th, our special purveyors meeting on the 8th, and tonight's board meeting.
Very good. Director Avila.
Since the last board meeting, I attended the special purveyor meeting on the 8th. I called into Metropolitan's Finance Committee and the Metropolitan Board meeting on the 12th. On the 19th was the water issues yesterday, and tonight's board meeting.
Director McMillan.
Excuse me, on March 7th, I participated in CSDA Fiscal Committee. On March 8th, I attended Calleguas purveyor meeting. And also with management later on to discuss strategy for upcoming MWD board and committee meetings. Also on the 12th, I attended the CSDA's webinar on creating and implementing a successful communication strategy. That should be posted soon on their website. On the 19th, I participated in CSDA's workshop on understanding the roles and responsibilities of public employees. And I neglected to put it down here, so I'll have to give you a corrected report, but I also attended the Calleguas Water Issues Committee and then tonight's board meeting.
Very good. And for me, on March 7th, I attended the Las Virgenes presentation of Flames to Ocean. I thought it was pretty amazing to see. I kind of hope that all us guys get to see it, staff especially kind of opens up your eyes and how things get mixed up, and still people have different views on to evacuate or not to evacuate, but how serious the communication obstacles were and how intense some of the losses were. So that was really an interesting thing. March 8th, I attended the Purveyor meeting on rates. On the 12th, I attended the Metropolitan Water District Board meeting on rates and tonight's board meeting. Any upcoming meetings attended by the board members not on the upcoming meetings list?
There was something I would like to share. If you go to CSDA, they have an extremely robust learning website. And for myself, I made a list of the on-demand webinars. These are free. You can take them at any time you want. And since I made this index for myself, I thought I'd share it with y'all. But it's 84 webinars that you can go and click on. But they do also have live ones too that are no cost to CSD members. So you have it's a lot. You have the chance to, if there's some area of interest, Director Tebow, you wanted to learn a little bit more about special district financing.
Yeah.
Finances. They've got a whole set of programs on there.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
I just wanted to share that. Well,
Very good.
GMA meeting on the 27th.
Okay. Very good. Future agenda items?
oh, yeah.
Make a note.
The written communication, water supply conditions report.
Yeah, there was a water supply conditions report in the packet. I don't know, Jennifer, if you have any commentary you'd like to offer?
Not really, other than I think we're expecting that we're gonna get an updated state water project allocation announcement very soon. Because the last one where they raised it to 15% actually was done just ahead of the most recent significant snowpack that we received. So we're hoping to see another increase in that soon.
Thank you. And for the other item, maybe Ian, if you want to comment on the memo that was included about GMA staffing?
Yeah, so there's in November, Dave Borchard, who's on the agriculture rep on the GMA, Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency board, brought up a long simmering issue about GMA staffing and said he wanted to look into whether we should, whether the GMA should get rid of county staff and have some alternative to staffing the agency. And what that precipitated was in a executive committee meeting earlier this year, Gene West and Dave Borchard, who are on the executive committee, essentially hired Rattan and Tucker to answer a question, the open question about whether anyone besides the county and United, whether those are the only two options to staff the agency. And as you can see in the memo, Rattan and Tucker came back to say that that is too narrow a interpretation, and that in that lawyer's opinion, the GMA can hire whoever they want to staff the agency. And especially as water master, the water master can unequivocally hire whoever they want. So this is going to be the topic of the meeting next week, which Director Avila was referencing. There's going to be a discussion about how they're going to proceed and what options they have and how they're going to decide between those options. So the memo itself is limited to the opinion, limited in the 11 pages or whatever it is, to saying essentially that the county can hire whoever they want. Or sorry, the GMA can hire whoever they want, not just the county or United.
As contract operators, not special specialties like
You can hire them as staff and they can contract for specific services, however they want to do it.
I tried to follow this as Mike Dodd. Seems like I kept going backwards.
More like that typical GMA.
Thank you for providing that. Thank you. Okay, well, I guess we will close the open session and we will go into closed session. Let us reconvene the open session and closed session. We have a closeout.
The board had a discussion with council and staff and no action was taken.
Very good. Then I guess all that is left is adjournment. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Mr. President.
Do you have a minute?
Sure.